Welcome to the Ferment podcast, conversations about worship and transformation. Today's guest is Diane Thiel-Sharp. Diane is a worship leader, songwriter, and vocal coach from Marietta, Georgia.
What up, Diane? Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Adam. Good to see you.
Oh, it's so good to have you on finally.
Thank you for having me.
Well, tell everybody where you're at right now.
I'm at home in my Marietta studio where I part-time vocal coach here.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's like guitars behind you and there's microphones and stuff. It looks very cool.
Yeah, it's weird how you've got to kind of dress your Zoom area.
That's right.
So that it fits your vibe. So
okay,
yeah.
Well, let's just talk about that for a second. I mean, we're going to do some other stuff, but you just said vocal coaching. Talk to me about that. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, I'm a late bloomer. I started coaching. I was an artist first for many, many, many years. And then really only the last, I guess about 12 years, I was invited by my vocal mentor and now boss, who you have had on the podcast, Jan Smith.
Yeah, Mama Jan.
Mama Jan, yeah. She's just one of my besties. And I was her student early in the late 90s and into the early 2000s. And all along the way, she asked me to come coach for her. And I just never really pictured it. I didn't think of myself as a coach, and then had some major life changes. I imagine we'll touch on that a little bit today.
I'm sure we will.
And it was kind of a place of having to reinvent myself a bit. And I said, okay. I said yes. And so this is my part-time, 3 times a week. I work with artists and vocal coach.
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, I think we assume that artists need vocal coaching, but I think sometimes we don't assume that worship leaders need vocal coaching. That's just something I've encountered over and over again.
Yes,
right?
That's really true. It's amazing how many worship leaders I work with.
Yeah.
I didn't start there, but I'm finding that is a huge need.
Yeah.
First of all, people singing rock and roll in the morning is like really hard on the voice.
That's right.
And the demands. And frankly, where a lot of these songs are written, these bridges tend to hit in people's voices that are so hard. And I just see people wear their voices out. And so just helping.
Well, that's really beautiful. So listen, guys and gals, if you're leading worship and you've never had somebody help you with your vocal a little bit, just reach out to Miss Diane. She is your person. Well, I'm sure we may even come back into that at some point in this podcast. But Diane, here's what I want to do. I was telling you a moment ago off mic, this is probably going to sit inside of a little ongoing series we're going to have here this summer called, at least in my mind, Mothers and Fathers of Vineyard Worship. And I consider you to be one of these people. You're like one of these very important figures in Vineyard Worship. And there's a few stories we still haven't told. So I just want to pick up there. Can you just maybe share a little bit of your story? Talk to us about how you grew up. Were you always a Christian? Were you always a singer?
Right.
Give us a little bit of the background.
Okay. Always a singer, yes.
Okay.
Even
a little kid.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Mom said I was singing harmonies when I was, 3 and 4, and that's been an interesting thing as a coach to see people there is just like this musical deposit that's so supernatural and interesting, and so that's something I always loved, and grew up born in Baltimore, moved around a bit, and had a really creative childhood. My mom's super creative, very loving, kind of the house everybody wanted to hang out at. My dad was a businessman, traveled quite a bit. So it was really my mom and my sisters, who are identical twins, and myself. I was the big sister, and putting on shows and doing all the things. And so we did go to a little Presbyterian church, and it was kind of just just one of the slots in our life, but I wouldn't say it was incredibly integrated or that it was a part of daily life.
Yeah.
And I certainly didn't have any understanding of a relationship with Jesus. So it was really in my middle school years that my mom, who is a lifelong learner, went back and started a career, went back to school to start a career as a teacher, kind of met this group of hippies who loved Jesus, and they started hanging out at our house. They'd come over, and especially one girl in particular, Suzanne, who had long hair, down to her waist, and she played a guitar. And it was so classic. She drove a blue Volkswagen Bug with a butterfly decal on the front. It was like my dream. She's singing, writing songs. I just thought, I just want to be her. She's the coolest. So, but she was great. And
Joan Baez.
Just talks.
Just had that Joan Baez vibe.
Totally. Yeah. And so, she spent a lot of time with us. And we, at one point, we would do little Bible studies and stuff. She took us to a movie at the theater. Again, this is in the 70s, and it was done by Billy Graham.
Yeah.
It was called A Time to Run. And all the music was Larry Norman and Randy Stonehill, all the, the original Christian artists, guys. And at the end, they had an altar call. And I went forward.
In the theater?
in the theater. And I was an incredibly shy, very, very quiet. I played my little baritone uke in my bedroom with my tape recorder and would, learn Carole King songs and stuff like that. But that was like so even going forward was a big deal. And it was a very real moment. It was transformative in that moment. But then there wasn't like a lot of follow-up.
Yeah.
So it was several years later when I was 16 and met my late husband, who was from a Christian home. He was my guitar teacher. He just asked me do you know Jesus as your personal savior? And I thought he was really cute, and he was teaching me how to play guitar. And so I was like, yeah. I remembered I'd gotten a little card that I'd signed that said, yes, I had invited Jesus in my heart. I think I had it in my wallet. So I'm like, yeah, I am.
I carried this card in my wallet.
I'm a card carrying Christian.
Yes.
Not only am I a Christian.
Yes, that's right.
But what happened, just kind of how it all ties together is I thought, gosh, he's going to ask me some questions. I don't know anything. Yeah. So I went home, and this girl, Suzanne, had given me a living Bible. And I remember her saying, read the Gospel of John. And so I just went home and started reading. I really literally fell in love with Jesus through reading the living Bible, the Gospel of John. And that started everything. And then Kevin, 2 years later, at 18, became my husband. And we started a journey in the whole CCM world, playing out at little Christian coffee houses, and
wow,
eventually got signed to Light Records. And
that's so cool. Okay, we have to go back to one moment because my brain is stuck in this story a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you go forward at the movie theater, right?
Right.
This is bananas to my ears. Is there someone down there saying who wants to get saved? So they had someone at the movie theater who's like, "Hey, who wants to know Jesus tonight?" Built
into this movie at the very end.
Yeah.
Billy Graham fills up the screen, and he does what he did.
Yeah.
And if you are, and if your heart's beating, I'm like, yeah, my heart's beating like crazy out of my chest, and come down. And I remember just feeling completely compelled. And they had pre-set up. Have some folks down there to talk to people.
Yeah.
And that's where I got my card. And
where's my card?
I know, right? And so someone prayed with me. And
okay,
it's crazy.
Yeah, so what did your mom and your siblings think?
Well, my mom really came to faith much later. And I think and my sisters, not long after, I think through all that, we started going to like a little Bible study thing. And my mom was just really open.
Yeah.
But I don't think would have considered her that, that she was born again or, and so in fact, she would a lot of times come from a more humanistic sort of a mindset, incredibly loving. And when her personality and her natural love for people and for the poor, like she demonstrated Christ-likeness, but here we are in this little Baptist church thing here, and so it kind of rubbed against some of the things that she would say to us. And I remember one time my sisters and I made little signs, and we marched around the table just saying, we believe in God. We believe in God.
That's so funny. That's so funny. Yeah. So something had happened in you all, and it was kind of catching up to your mom.
Yeah, I mean,
Like-
many years later,
Yeah, that's
as an
so
adult,
funny.
my mom radically came to Christ, and it was beautiful.
That's great. Okay, so you said in your story a moment ago as well, you were taking guitar lessons with the guy who eventually became your husband. Just talk to us about that, because that's kind of fun, you know?
Oh, it's super fun, and it's a little hilarious side note is that the boy that I was dating at the time had just gotten me a guitar for my birthday.
Oh no. This is so good.
I know, probably the worst gift he's ever given a girl, you know. Was the greatest gift for me.
That's great.
Turned my life around. Thank you.
Yes.
But we were a little on the way out anyway. So, but it looked pretty suspicious that then I went and started dating the guitar teacher. But it was one of those things my mom looked into. Well, we need somebody to help you learn. And he was going to a different high school, Kevin, at the time. And so somehow we connected, and I would go over to that high school, and we would meet up in one of the little rehearsal rooms, and he would teach me. And And
then you guys end up making music together, though.
We did. Yeah, right away.
I mean, talk to me about that, because this would have been maybe, I don't know, you put it in this is like in my brain anyway, like second wave Jesus people right after Larry Norman and the Boys, beginning of CCM, right?
Oh yeah. We were going to see second chapter of Acts and Larry Norman and Randy. Well, actually, where we first happened, we went to see, I think probably it was Randy Stonehill or something, which later my husband road managed Petra and actually was on tour with Randy, and they got to know each other. So it's really funny how much later some of those connections happened. But, we were 70s hippies, so we had our guitars with us everywhere we went. And we were on the lawn waiting to get in. I'd forgotten about this story, Adam.
Yeah.
And we were playing our guitars and singing, This guy who managed a local, like kind of the place called the Joyful Noise in Chicago, coffee house, came out and he said, "Hey, this will be your audition. Play something for me. We'd like to book you." And so we just sang a little song, and he booked us at the coffee house. And that's really how we started on the whole coffee house circuit, which was quite big back then.
Yeah.
We would travel, and later became a band, and, so.
That's so cool. I just love that. I love that. I love that. Okay, so how long did it take you guys to start writing your music?
I would say we seriously started writing after we connected with this other girl, and we kind of became a trio, like a folk trio. And she was a really great writer, and we did a lot of co-writing there. So then we were writing all of our material. And that was probably 78, 79.
That is so cool. Yeah. Okay. So when you guys were doing that, did you feel like artists? Tell me what you felt like, or did you just feel like, we're just compelled? We don't know anything else to do, or were you? And I'm using air quotes for those who are listening on the podcast. Did you feel like you were trying to, quote unquote, be an artist or make it?
No, I will say that we were just really fueled by just wanting to sing for people, like invite people in to what had happened in our lives, And through a lot of my life, the things that have come to me have literally just, like, I don't, I haven't really chased it. It's like God has just opened doors and, surprised me in a lot of ways. And I think that it's always for me been a very organic kind of a thing. Like, I
love that.
Yeah, kind of comes.
Yeah,
from that place.
that's very similar to me as well. I was reflecting once with a friend about how I've never applied for a job. It's always been things just kind of find me. I don't know how this happens. I don't. Things
I
find
relate
me.
To that.
And that's not everybody's story, and doesn't have to be everybody's story. But I do think that's interesting that sometimes, you just do your thing and things do find you. Oh, okay, let's maybe move in a different direction here for a moment. Talk to me about when you got introduced to the Vineyard.
So, all the time that I was kind of in the CCM world, I was more connected to a wonderful small church that was more evangelical, very much like I ended up kind of becoming I guess you would call it more of a music director, where we'd have a special song, before the message, maybe sing a song or two together. I always had a real heart for worship, but that was more the context of it. And then one particular Sunday, it was our associate pastor who was speaking. We were small, maybe a couple hundred people. And we were a very hungry congregation. It was a really beautiful community, and we were praying for more of him. And so all that kind of preceded it. But he gave a message on the idea of being like our hearts not being fully devoted to God, and that we were, kind of sharing our affections. And we later called that particular Sunday Shock Sunday. That's the name that we called it, because, I was up at the piano, had just done my little special song or whatever. And it was like repentance just broke out, and people were weeping, and there were people, on their face, and I just, here I'm what do I do in this moment? Like, Lord, I was in that same space. So everything changed in a moment in this little church, right? And I remember after that, we kind of got together just sort of stunned, like, well, what now? I mean, we can't just treat next week like everything's changed. So one of the things we did, we were kind of a church in the box. We'd been meeting in the theater of a school. So we moved to the cafeteria just as a symbol, like taking all the production stuff. Like, I got behind the piano, we had a mic up front, and I just sang, and we waited. That's what we did. We just, people would come up, and here's what God's saying to me. It was in that time that I would, oh God, you've got to, what do you want me to do here?
Yeah.
And that's really where that sort of prophetic singing, I just would get an unction and a whisper, and I just would start singing and playing some chords, and then wait and stop, and then maybe somebody else would have something. And that went on for, it feels like at least a couple of months of just, we're not going to put something back together until you tell us to do that. It was beautiful. And we were seeing that we were praying for healings. People would have prophetic words. I had no language for any of this. No language. I usually refer to it as this really virginal experience. I didn't know what was happening. And so it created a desperation in me to hear God. And so during that time, our pastor very wisely, he's like, we got to get, we need some help. And there was a local vineyard, and he knew to call them right in Palatine, Illinois, and called them, reached out. We started to get together. We would go over there and do some nights of worship, and I would just play. And that was an incredible season. And actually, eventually, when that church folded, I absorbed some of the worship team, and which was beautiful. Just a real sweet time. But during that time, one of the Vineyard conferences came through, and we were like, we're going. We just got to go figure out what has happened to us. And so I remember walking in, and I knew, like, immediately that it was putting language. Like, this is what's happening to us. This feels just like breathing to me.
Yeah, it's interesting as you tell the story too. Like, even at the beginning, when you were talking about Shock Sunday, like the response that you all had is a very Vineyard response. Let's worship and let's wait. Worship and wait.
It really was, and I just really think that our leaders at that time. I mean, still dear friends with them. My one pastor that was the lead pastor is just still like a brother to me, and still walking with God faithfully. And it was an incredible season. But walking into that conference and seeing it and hearing John, I mean, I've got to hear, John spoke, and I had a phenomenal encounter with Jesus that night, and the Holy Spirit just, fell on me, and it was incredible. Really impacted our little church. So that started my relationship. We were but we didn't become a vineyard or anything like that. And then another really big time in my life when God very clearly told my husband and I at the time that he wanted us to move to Atlanta, which meant literally letting go of everything that we had there. We had always been musicians, and my husband had finally gotten this great job working for Hamer Guitars, building guitars. I mean, it was just great. And then I was the worship pastor there, and everything was going great. It wasn't like, now's the time. And I remember sitting across from my pastor, just in tears, he and his wife, and just saying, "Here's what we've heard."
Yeah.
And he's like, "That sounds like God. I've got to give you away." Right. And so we moved. And the first thing we did was find a vineyard in Marietta. Rick and Ellen Coffin, the pastors, my other brother and sister now, they are the dearest friends. But then our life went into full on crisis mode as soon as we walked. As soon as we took the leap, everything fell apart.
Dang.
Everything.
Dang.
And,
okay. So what years are happening here?
97 was when we moved to
and when did
Atlanta.
when did your little church experience like the move of the Spirit? Shock Sunday.
I would say probably earlier 90s.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. Because it really. Oh, my now husband and I just figured out the other day, this is kind of crazy because, Mother's Day just happened and we were reflecting on, because Rod is, old school Vineyard has been there forever.
Yeah.
We were reflecting on that day. And all of a sudden I realized that right around the time when the Vineyard was forming as we know it, my little band, we played Calvary Chapel. We opened for Mustard Seed Faith, and it was probably like 79, 80, like right in that same season.
Yeah.
And I just you asking me, some of this to kind of reflect, just maybe start, as I get older, I can look back now and start to connect dots and see the work of God in ways that you can't see when you're in the middle of it.
It's so interesting.
No idea.
It's so interesting. It's one of the reasons why we actually need to tell our story sometimes.
Oh, it is, absolutely.
Because in doing so, you find out all the little ways that you were in the middle of something and God was moving and he was helping you in maybe ways that you didn't even know. But wow, here it is. Yeah,
those aha moments that I've had so many times as the story's coming out of my mouth, like even, here, like I see more nuance and just the tender, thoughtful care that was happening in real time, right? But I couldn't see it then.
Man, okay, so you're living in Atlanta and you said everything fell apart. Like you followed God, you and your husband.
Yeah.
You were like, hey, we think God is telling us to move to Atlanta. You talked to your pastor. He's like, I think that might be God too. I need to give you away. Yeah. And so you pack your bags and you move to Atlanta. What happened when everything fell apart?
Yep. Well, it fell apart even before I left Atlanta because my husband left first. Doors opened wide for a job for him there. And so he was going to go ahead and get that started. I was going to sell the house, kind of, close things down and then bring the kids. We have 2 children. Literally, the first week of his new job, he went to Texas to help get it started, do some training for a store that was opening there. And it was for a big Mars Music, which is no longer, but it was like this big superstore concept. It was incredible. And he was going to manage the guitar department. So he went to open this store. And while he was there, this huge amp that was on an upper level, he was getting it down and it slipped. And he tried to stop it from hitting the floor and blew out his back. At first you think, okay, we just kind of, we'll shake this off. He needs a little rest. And it just kept getting worse and worse and worse to the point where I'm selling this house. I'm thinking, do we leave? And the call of God was so strong. It was like, we're going to go. We're going to just do it. Yeah. And we did. And he ended up, for the next almost 7 years, lost the job, was on workers' comp. He was almost completely bedridden for the next almost 7 years.
Unbelievable.
And I started working at a grocery store.
Yeah.
And at one point I had a few jobs I was driving for UPS over Christmas season, with my van, and just like any way that we could make a little living.
Yeah.
And going to our little church in Marietta, who were amazing and came around us, and yeah.
So just like instant difficulty, and part of what I hear in that story, Diane, is it's a peculiar kind of difficulty because it's like protracted, right? Like anybody who's ever helped someone who had medical issues or health difficulties, it's a particular kind of suffering that we don't have a window into.
You're absolutely right. And the level of pain that he was in was the kind of pain that he gnashed his teeth through the whole night. Always.
Yeah.
Like he never got relief, and he was on heavy meds. And back then, we know a lot more now, they just gave you those hard, drugs, and a lot of deep depression, and it was painful. I was reflecting this morning a little bit, and I'm like, wow, sometimes you look back and like, how? How did we get through that? How, and to kind of finish out that part of the story too, the kind of what happened next was, actually in that season there was this weird little side thing happening in Vineyard and Vineyard music. And, and I was just doing things sporadically, and, I became the worship pastor at our little vineyard, still doing some part-time gigs on the side, just to help pay the bills. And then at the end of that period of time, Kevin had a surgery that was actually quite successful. And it wasn't like 100%, but going from, it came off of all those drugs, which was its own deal, started entering back in life, just went back to school to become a luthier, build guitars and repair. We figured with all of our industry connections and all that we'd done our life, we would start he could do that here, so he could be a home business. And, he started going to school. It was the most normal time that we'd had in years. And I just remember the normalcy of the morning. He'd get up, he was studying, we'd have breakfast together, kiss him goodbye. So there was okay, I think we did it. I think we've made it through. Lots of hope. Our friends were so full of hope and excitement. He and I renewed our vows during that time. We had our 25th anniversary, and just a lot of hope. I always feel bad telling the story because I know people just get so hit. Like I know, but 2.5 weeks in of him doing this job, and he would drive off, I don't have to go all the details, but something happened. I got a phone call. He'd been leaving a voicemail, and on the voicemail, it suddenly went dead silent. There was a big sound, and so they called me, and turns out he was in a car accident. He was killed in a head-on car accident.
Unbelievable.
Even as I say it again, there's so much healing, but my body remembers the shock. Like I can kind of feel it in my arms right now, just for a second. It's just like, it was a new level of shock. I think I shook my head for over a year. Like I would just be sitting and all of a sudden be like, like, did that really happen? And I think everybody around us felt the same. Yeah. At that point I'd had more of a connection with the Vineyard Global.
Yeah.
And oh my goodness, people reaching out from all over the world, just like in utter shock. So it felt like a collective gasp,
Yeah.
And so that started a whole new season of
course.
Now what?
I don't know the timeline here, Diane, but is this somewhere around the time you wrote If You Say Go?
So I
Talk to me about
wrote,
that. Yeah.
Yeah. I wrote If You Say Go in my church in Chicago.
No way.
Like, yeah.
Okay, so like even like when God is saying go to Atlanta, if you say, did it come out of that?
It was even before that.
Get out.
It was a prophetic word for my life. I'm so thankful
out.
that everybody else got
out.
benefit from it. But it was a overflow. I'm really getting emotional. It was an overflow and response to what was happening in my life in that time, and the desperation you feel when you're just like, God, I love you. And I want to do whatever you say because I know it's best for my life. Like, I want what you want, so show me how to move when you move, how to hold still when you tell me to hold, all of that. So it came from a place of passion and joy, even though that song has later, it is connected with people in suffering in ways I never anticipated when I wrote it. And like it exploded when we played it in our little church, right? And then if I do like I'd be invited to do some worship thing and I'd sing it and it would just explode.
Right.
It would just be, oh my gosh. Like I was surprised, because it's such a simple song, really, melodically and everything. It's very simple. And the song came in a different way than other songs have come for me. It was like, and I don't say this lightly, it was like taking dictation. I was in my car. I didn't have an instrument in front of me. And I just started singing it. And I literally had to you're driving and I'm reaching for a napkin and a pen on my steering wheel and just like, writing stuff down. And then went home and found it on the piano and kind of, sang into it. But the song was pretty formed in that space. So I knew that there was something on the song, if you will, at that point, but had no idea what was going to happen with it.
Diane, I just think it's a perfect song. A couple things here. Number one, I think it's a perfect song. Number two, I think it's one of the the really important songs in the Vineyard catalog. We have thousands of songs in the Vineyard catalog. Which thousands. It's crazy. Just the deposit of worship and words and melodies that God has given to our little family in worship. But then there's these songs that are just really, they're pillars. I won't say more important. I'm just going to say pillars.
Goodness.
So you have Breathe, and you have Holy and Anointed One, and you have In the Secret, and you have some of Sam Yoder's tunes, Wonderful, and all of these things. And I even think of maybe like Crispin's tune, Not Be Moved. But I also think of your song, If You Say Go. And I put a lot of these songs together, at least in my mind, because they're expressing something very unique about our Vineyard DNA. And they're also songs that I think will be sung in 100 years. Now, I've written a bunch of songs, and I think most of my songs are not going to be written or sung in 100 years. You know what I mean? And that's fine. It's completely fine. But I
let
think
your
this
kingdom
song,
come, know.
But I think this song has something to it. And if you're a Vineyard Worship leader, if you don't know this song, I want you to go find it. But it's something that comes up regularly at our church. Like we pull it out a few times a year, and it just says something that no other song says.
That's so,
humbling
and beautiful. And
the other thing that I just want to say too is, and it's very interesting because I don't think I knew this. It's wild to me that you wrote it before all of this stuff happened.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you really another little funny part of the story too. So my life now, so many people know that I am remarried.
Yeah.
And that story is wild and crazy.
It's amazing.
Because, in our little church in Marietta, there's this family, the Sharps, and Charlotte and Rod and their kids. And we became fast friends with them. We hosted small groups here in this home that I live in now, and Rod would lead it, and Rod and Charlotte would lead it, and I would do the worship. And, Charlotte was one of my very, very best friends. And Charlotte, you may or may not know this, but Charlotte was John Wimber's assistant for a while, and Todd Hunter's assistant, and like one of the originals,
That's right.
and just incredible, fun, and just wonderful. Greatest friend, my greatest cheerleader. And so we connected. And remember when I said that we renewed our vows, like in the it was on their porch.
Yeah.
And so right before Kevin died, Charlotte was diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah.
And so when Kevin died and this resounding silence was in my life, I threw myself into caring for Charlotte because I had, I knew how to do that gig. I'd done it for a lot of years, right?
Yeah.
And I loved her. And so I would sing over her when she would have to get an MRI or something. They would literally come and get me and put me in the little lead cover suit and have me sing over her to keep her from, panicking. So she passed 2 years after Kevin passed. And so the grief upon grief was just unbelievable. And that's really, my healing didn't really get going after that. And so her husband, Rod, and I were just great friends. And we literally just grieved for 3 years as friends. We would go out for coffee and we would, so anyway, the funny piece that I want to tell you when you talk about how it was such a Vineyard song, Charlotte was the one back when I first started going to the church, and I introduced the church at the song at Vineyard just because, you do.
Yeah.
And it went nuts, right? She was very prophetic. She's like, John would have loved that song. Yeah. That song is going to go all over the world. You need to send it in. You need to. And I never did. I would not send it in. I didn't know how to. What do you do?
Yeah, how do you
back
do
then,
it?
It was like, how do you do it? Yeah. I'm like, whatever, la la la. And she's like, no, you have. This is important. And it actually, what happened is I went to a little conference, very small. Mark Miller, who ended up producing that particular record, that ended up being called A Piece Ago. He and I did not sing on it. We did a little song share, and I sang the song there. There was a woman there who sang every lyric with it, and I was like, "What is going on?" Well, she had been from Chicago and had heard it at some conference. And actually, I used to get emails once in a while if I did a little thing, people going, "Hey, can I get the lyrics to that song or chord chart?" Yeah. So I would just send it, So it was like, why is she singing with me? She knows this whole song. And so, I think Mark just sensed there was a lot of life on the song.
I love that.
He started pursuing me, and it took me a while to finally get it to him. But
I just want to say a couple things because that's a great little story you just told there. Number one, with respect to songs, and I'm so glad you shared this. Vineyard songs happen in a lot of different ways, but one of the things that Casey has said for a long time is, if there's a song in the Vineyard that's really great, it always finds its way out. There's this sense in which we kind of don't really have to shop the song or promote it. And there's nothing wrong with sharing your songs with me or Casey. Like, literally, there's nothing wrong with that. Right. That's great. But it's funny, when there's a really great song, it always comes to the surface. Yeah. It finds its way out. God moves on it. It happens that way.
Yeah. So, well, I was so thankful Charlotte got to see that happen. And oh my gosh, the I Told You So's were just hilarious. She just would I'll be all smug, when she'd see me doing it at a conference or something. She's like, I told you.
That's so good. Well, okay, so now I just want to go back to the other part of the story you were telling. because what had happened here is you care for your husband for years. Mm-hmm. He's getting his life back on track. Then he dies suddenly in an accident.
Yes.
Then you lose your friend.
Yes.
Then you and Rod, the mates who are, for all intents and purposes, left grieving. You find each other.
Yeah, yeah.
Talk to me about that, because it's one of the most amazing stories. It's just like, it's wild.
It is. And it was so fun. And it is fun to tell the story. We were so oblivious. I mean, we literally were just great friends. Not to mention, Charlotte was my best friend, and I just couldn't even imagine.
Right.
I just thought, well, she'll beat me up when I'm here. I don't know. I can't, So I just, we just enjoyed a beautiful friendship, and it was very centered around our grief. It was kind of, I was a young widow, and I didn't know anybody who had lost their spouse. And so I really didn't have anybody that I could process that with.
Right.
So here we'd both lost both of them. Right. So our grief was very intertwined. We would just talk, and it's like, man, I'm feeling this. I'm like, oh, I know. I just went through work and I don't even know how I got there. I don't know, so just the other thing about talking and telling stories, it normalizes your experience. You don't feel so alone. Right.
Yeah.
So it took, it literally 3 years of that. Later we find out that everybody, all of our friends in California that knew both of us and friends here, like all knew that that's where it was going. Yeah. And they were thankfully with so much grace kept their mouths closed and let God do it. Let God do the work. The funniest, I'll tell you the brief little funny part of the story that people love is like, so we're after church one Sunday, and Rod just felt like he heard the Lord say, ask her out for ice cream. So he's like, okay, I'll just, and he, completely clueless. So he asked me out, which was not weird. Like we just did stuff together.
Sure.
So we go down to the little Marietta Square and get some ice cream, and we're sitting on this little park bench and talking about life. And while we're talking, this homeless guy comes by, so we invite him to come sit with us, and we pray for him. And, then he goes on, and then we go back to talking about life. And somewhere along the conversation, it's like, do you think you'll ever get married again? You think, like, I love marriage. I don't know. I think so, but gosh, the idea of dating, and, I think I was 50 at that point. So then we sit for a minute, and then his part of the story, he says, the Lord just says, ask her if she'll go out with you. And he's like, oh my God. And his out was, hey, if I were to ask you out, would you go out? It was totally hypothetical. It wasn't like, hey, you want to go out? Yeah. It was if, which nobody had asked me out all these years. I was very shut down, very unavailable. And I was like, yeah, I guess I would. And then we were both like, well, we wouldn't want it to get weird, And I said, you know what? We've lived a lot of life. I think that we have a deep enough friendship that if we did move into something, we could go, bad idea. And
that's right.
We could be great friends, right? So, but the other really hilarious thing is then we say goodnight, he leaves. I think I see him next to church. I'm like waiting for the phone call. Now, all of a sudden, I'm looking at him differently than I've ever looked in my life. And my heart is on fire. Like I literally, it was like being a teenager. It was hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't do anything about it. Like nothing for months and months. And finally, I got the courage to say, hey, that thing, you said that thing, is that on the table? I didn't give him the subtext because I got to shut it down or I'm going to explode.
Right.
What had happened is that he, and I thank God for him, he said after that, he just, he felt like he was a little set up by God. And then he was like, I don't know if I'm ready. And so he went into counseling. And he's like, if I'm going to go into a relationship, I want to be present. And so he just started, without me knowing, going more inward and working. And so when it finally, that 6 months later, when we finally went on our real first date, I mean, we were married 6 months after that. Like it was just, we were so ready and we had done the work. And it was out of all the transitions in all of my life, there's never been one easier than that.
Isn't that amazing?
Amazing? It's been wonderful.
And now you guys kind of have, in my brain anyway, you guys are like power team. You guys are like you guys are like prayer power team. I mean, I have like my brain has like shelves, and it's like people and places and things go on particular shelves, and I just think of you two as like power prayer people. That's who you
love
are.
To pray.
Like, you're gonna help. You're gonna help.
Well, and that's been beautiful because I had started right before we got together working with the Pastor Sabbath retreats. Chris Miller, who is just one of our dearest friends, invited me as a worship leader. And then I kind of stumbled into inner healing prayer. Again, that's a hilarious story how I got into inner healing prayer. I got set up, man. And I just, like, my first couple times leading prayer, I had barely learned how to do it. And Chris Miller, either in his foolishness or his wisdom, just shoved me in, like with pastors.
Yeah.
I mean, not just, I'm like, oh, this is great. And so again, I was in this incredibly desperate place. Oh God, oh God. And then I just wanted to project a really non-anxious presence, and we would meet with the Lord and invite the Holy Spirit inside. I'm like, oh, you got to do something, because what if this happens? And God would just show up crazy. Like, people were just, I was just watching, and I fell so in love with Jesus, because just how he just so personally loved people through it. So then Chris was kind of on the inside scoop when all this was happening, going down with Rod, and immediately knew Rod's history in the vineyard and everything, and just said, bring him. And so after our wedding, 2.5 weeks after our wedding, we just got off our honeymoon. We did our first PSR together, and we're praying for people.
That's great.
And so ever since then, that's probably been one of our main ministries. It's just,
I love that.
We do worship together, and
Oh, and part of what I love, Diane, too, is there's this little thread. It has a little bit of "if you say go" in it all the way through.
Right?
You write this song. It's actually kind of a prophetic window to your whole life. You're kind of saying to God, it's kind of something you say early that you're going, as I'm hearing your story, that you're going to say over and over again to God.
Yes.
Like the Spirit comes to your church. What do we do now? I don't know. Yep. It's an if you say go moment. You get connected to the vineyard, then you move to Atlanta, sort of saying, life in Illinois is not bad, but if you say go, so we go to Atlanta, then you kind of have to do this again as you just, deal with your husband's broken body and dealing with that sort of thing, and then walking through the grief of losing a mate, and then losing a friend, and then maybe finding a new mate and finding new love, which is kind of like catching you off guard, but here it is,
100%.
I just see that as a prism through which you can kind of find your whole life.
I think you're right. And I think, as I contemplated talking about the song, and because I've never really done this part, I've told people these little stories, but for this to be a focus, it has helped me to see, really interestingly, that conference that I went to, in the middle of the conference, during the time when John was inviting the Holy Spirit, I remember I was sitting like maybe 3 or 4 rows back, and he just was encouraging us just to lean in. And my response, which is very unusual, I'm a really naturally joyful person.
Yeah.
I get excited about food and people, and that is just who I am. So what my response in that moment, I began to weep and wail, like embarrassingly so, in this huge conference, the Odeum Stadium, I think in Chicago. The people around me were concerned, like, what is going on? And I just, my whole body just wailing and wailing. And then after all that wailing, there's this phenomenal peace came over me. And then just joy. I began speaking in tongues, and I just wanted him. That's all I wanted. And later, I always wonder what was that? I really think the Lord showed me many years later that I was actually weeping for myself.
Yeah.
And what was coming. I really think it was.
I think so too.
And
Diane, I am just charismatic enough to believe that.
Yeah.
Listen,
I know.
I totally believe that.
I mean, and it was so many years later that I felt that.
Yeah.
It's
beautiful.
Yeah.
So beautiful. Well, I'll tell you what, let's maybe tie a bow on this right here. You have such a tremendous story, and thank you for sharing it. There's probably a lot of people who are listening to this podcast. They're worship leaders. They're in the band, more than a handful of pastors as well. Some of them are maybe new to this, maybe new to the Vineyard, or even new to what they're doing. What would you want to just say to the worship leaders and the songwriters and the musicians who are in our little family that we call the Vineyard? Anything you want to share?
one is that I think something I've learned from where all along my story is to trust the slow work of God, that every moment isn't going to be fireworks but it's still good. And
Right.
God is always at work. This is what I've learned. Like in the smallest of moments, in the little interactions that you thought were nothing, there's groundwork, there's just all kinds of things. So just break off that sense that I've got to make something happen here. So that would be one, and that's kind of a one of those retrospect kind of a things. Although I do think I learned to cooperate with the process, cooperating with God in his work, like leaning into what he's doing. And I think another thing that I think has marked as I lead worship, but never to judge people by how they're responding to your worship. It's really easy to be like, oh man, nothing's going on here, or look at that person, I'm going to go after that, and it's like, I've really learned that we look at the outward, God looks at the heart, and sometimes the outward is going to look really different than what's happening inside. Coupled with that is learning to really love people as you lead them in worship. Like ask God to give you love for the people that you're leading and to hope the best in them. Like really, just expect the best out of people.
I love it.
And I think the other thing I would say, I guess this is my inner healing person talking.
Yeah.
Go after that junk.
Go after that junk.
Oh my gosh. Just if you are in this frenzied space of leading worship, like trying to perform your way in or outrun shame, like all that's, you know what's chasing you, whether you can really name it, you can feel that sort of sense of being chased by something. A lot of times it's just, years of believing something that isn't true, but it's never been brought to the surface so you can actually look at it. Like if somebody else were to say to you, I believe this, you'd be like, you are crazy.
Right.
But yet we form our whole lives around these sort of latent lies that just happen really early. So I think living a lifestyle of in real time, letting God bring things to the surface and just inviting him into that process. And so instead of being chased, you kind of just turn and face it because you've got the Holy Spirit in you and you don't have to try to outrun something, right? And it's a very different posture.
Right. I love that. I mean, if there's anything I've learned in my life it's that very uncomfortable truth, but it is true. Like, turn and face it.
Yeah.
And that honestly, that's where the grace is.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. The Lord showed me that's like, if you're worrying about something that's coming or might have come or something in the back, like, the idea of manna is only works when it's fresh, right?
Yeah.
It can only be eaten the day that it was made.
Yeah.
And so like when I'm trying to be in my future, wondering how something's going to go, that's a reminder. It's like, I don't have bread. That bread hasn't even made yet. And it's, or if I'm trying to reach for old, it's just not going to be available. So just about be present.
Love that. Love it. Diane, thank you for sharing your amazing story.
Thanks for asking.
Goodness gracious.
Fun.
You are always welcome on this podcast. And just so you know, before much longer, we got to do this again. And I want to do like 30 minutes with you so you can just tell people to take care of their voices.
Yeah.
Okay?
Heck yeah.
Because I know that's a big deal. All right, everybody. Hey, listen, if you haven't listened to If You Say Go in a Minute, you should just go check it out right now. Maybe even put it in the Sunday set.
Do it.
Do it. That's right. All right, everybody. Peace.
Hey everyone, Casey Corum here, producer of the podcast. Thanks for listening. As always, if you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. First of all, leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Also, connect with us on social media. Instagram at the Ferment Podcast and Twitter at FermentCast. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. See you next week. Peace.